We felt the upheavals going on in Germany, and we had echoes of Italian anti-fascists who had fought Mussolini and were in exile. And then, of course, came that greatest of all events, one of the greatest in history, in my opinion, one of the very greatest, the Spanish Revolution of 1936, when one of the biggest anarcho-syndicalist movements, the CNT, National Confederation of Labor, with its anarchist adjunct or vanguard, if you like, and they use the words, anarchists use the words vanguard, words like vanguard, the FAI, or the Iberian Anarchist Federation, which altogether probably influenced at least 1 million people out of 24 million. I mean, where do you find an anarcho-syndicalist movement that large with its black and red flag, which has since been emulated in Latin America by the Sandinistas and others? The black standing for anarchy, the red standing for syndicalism, or workers' control of the factories. I mean, they collectivized a huge portion of the Republican area in the northeast of Spain, put it in established workers' control, established workers' committees to take over factories. In fact, the greater part of the factories in Catalonia, the northeastern stronghold of the anarcho-syndicalists, were taken over by the unions. See, and private property, to the extent that it existed, was very carefully controlled. Those inspiring events shaped our outlook so that when the war came, we expected that the Second World War would be a continuation of the First World War. We thought it was just another imperialist war, and we were indoctrinated into believing. By this time, by the way, I had broken with the Stalinists, the Communist Party, and I drifted over to Trotskyism. But we thought at that point, by 1939 and 1940, that the Second World War wouldn't even last as long as the First World War, that it would end as the First World War had in workers' insurrections. In fact, we saw in the darkness of the Second World War the beginning, we thought, of the glow of a new society. This would be it, the end of capitalism. Capitalism had gone through its chronic crisis of the 1930s, as Marx had predicted, and now, steeled with the more advanced ideas than even existed before the First World War, no longer social democrats, but one or another form of Bolshevism, committed to one or another form of Bolshevism, in this case Trotskyism, that the war would end very shortly in proletarian revolutions, a socialist United States of Europe, and maybe even of America. Well, it didn't happen. That requires a whole separate analysis by itself. In fact, Leon Trotsky, who was our teacher at that time, told us that if we did not get what we wanted, and he unfortunately died in 1940 at the very beginning of the war, or virtually at the beginning of the war, then we have to analyze everything. Why is it that capitalism could carry through a war like this? 5 years? German workers fighting right up to Hitler's bunker, defending him? No general strikes that we knew of in Germany? National struggles rather than international struggles? And class struggles? So coming out of that period, I felt personally, and as I felt, I'm sure many of my comrades at that time felt, that we had to make a fundamental reappraisal. We had to completely review all our basic theories, all our notions about the working class, all our notions about capitalism. How strong was it? We thought it was very weak. We thought it was on the point of collapse, both during the Depression and in the Second World War. But it came out stronger than ever, at least in the United States. In fact, we began to see the death of the old left by 1948. The Communist Party began to fracture up after the Henry Wallace campaign, the Progressive Party campaign of 1948. So we had to reconsider our position.
How much of that do you think is attributable, the continuation and proliferation of capitalism, attributable to the West playing the Germans against the Russians in the Second World War and the Russians against the Germans?
The Allies, to begin with, United States, Britain, Free French, and whatever, first of all, made it very difficult for the Germans to do anything, the German people. They demanded unconditional surrender, so that the German people were faced with either one of two alternatives: Hitler and their own national sovereignty, or, as the Allies very bluntly told them, they'd break up Germany. They'd literally break up Germany. They'd reduce Germany or return Germany to where it was before the French Revolution, with all its little duchies and cities and whatever you like, and maintain complete Allied surveillance of German life in every respect. In fact, we were told that we shouldn't fraternize with the Germans. Our troops shouldn't even talk to German women except to give orders, or talk to men and children except to give orders, you see. It wasn't giving out chocolate, if you please. Chocolate was okay in France, but it was not okay once you crossed the Rhine. The main thing is to deal with the Germans correctly, coldly, and indifferently, and let them know that they were a subject population, so that if there were any possibility of a German revolution, okay, then the Allies saw to it that that was completely muted and literally redirected whatever the energy of the German people may have been, redirected toward Hitler, who at least gave them a sense of a national identity. The Russians, so-called Soviets, the Red Army, was totally nationalistic. It did not try to fraternize at all with the Germans the way Lenin had tried to do in the First World War. The Germans were dealt with as complete enemies. German soldiers were treated or sent to gulags by and large, and many of them perished there. A very high percentage of them died, never returned. Raped German women. I'm not trying to make an apology, by the way, for the Nazis. I beg you to understand that this was not at all the case. But the Russians did not carry on a revolutionary war the way Lenin had. You see, Lenin had called for, "Comrade Germans, we are all workers, join us to make a world socialist revolution." Stalin said the Germans are enemies. He went back to the knights of the medieval German knights to point out that the Germans were basically a vicious anti-Slavonic people, you see. And the Internationale, which had been the anthem of the Soviets right up to the middle of the war, was dropped and replaced by a Motherland Russia nationalistic anthem. And finally, you know, the whole approach of both sides, all three, the Axis, notably Germany, as well as Italy, the Western Allies, and the so-called Soviets, dealt with this war as though it were totally a war of national liberation, not as a class war, which is what Lenin called for. But I think that that would understate, that would not sufficiently cover, in my opinion, the outcome of the war. It does not fully explain the outcome of the war. The point is basically that to a great extent we may have misread capitalism's virility, its strength, its internal strength. Capitalism, internally speaking, was much stronger than we ever realized. The 1930s was in fact a throwback in American history, so far as I'm concerned, to, oh, say, the 1880s. Because suddenly, after the flapper era of the 1920s, when even Western Union kids used to invest in the stock market and call up their broker, and everybody was into the image of an American dream that would be so utterly affluent that everybody would become a capitalist, and was taught to believe that each one was a capitalist. The Depression of the 1930s seemed to suddenly stop everything. The stock market not only crashed and people were wiped out, banks were wiped out, people lost their savings. The New Deal came in. It really did not pull America completely out of the Depression by a long shot. It just created a kind of dead era of millions of unemployed who were on WPA, or Works Progress Administration, building pools, post offices, and whatever you like. And nobody seemed to be in a decent economic condition at all. Everything seemed to be dead.